Well, 21st Century Cures is an initiative that basically started out as an idea in Chairman Fred Upton's mind, I should say. He's the chairman of the Energy and Commerce Committee. He's a Republican, so he's the chairman, and I'm the Democrat, so therefore I'm the ranking member. We're the leaders of our respective parties on the Energy and Commerce Committee that has jurisdiction over healthcare, NIH, CDC, drug approvals, medical device approvals. He decided to work with Diana DeGette, who's a Democratic member of the committee, because they felt that collectively more needed to be done to cure diseases where we haven't really made much progress. And they basically, our committee, or the health subcommittee of the Energy and Commerce Committee, went around the country and basically had hearings and forums and tried to get ideas in the hinterland, so to speak, about what should be done. A lot of the input came from, I would say, disease-centered groups, that focus and raise money and ask for more research on a particular disease, for example, ALS, for example. Well, a lot of the impetus, as I said, came from advocacy groups. I call them disease-specific advocacy groups because oftentimes they are. And of course, most of those have chapters in my district, or at least in New Jersey, and they come to visit on a regular, either here or in DC, and they usually say that they'd like to see some innovative programs so that there's more money for research or expedited approval. Well, the Energy and Commerce Committee passed the 21st Century Cures unanimously, essentially. I mean, there were no votes, and on a roll call, I mean, everybody had to say yes or no. I was surprised by that unanimous vote. I would have been surprised by it 6 months ago, because 6 months ago I would have said this. I don't even know if 21st Century Cures is going to get off the ground. As you know, Congress can be very partisan. But over the last 6 months, we've worked together, Democrat, Republicans, Upton, myself, Diana DeGette, Gene Green, who's the chairman of the Health Subcommittee, Joe Pitts, who's the Gene Green is the ranking Democrat on the Health Subcommittee, Joe Pitts is the chairman. And we've worked very hard to get to the point where we could come up with a consensus bill. So I wasn't surprised that it occurred. I would have been surprised 6 months ago. Well, 21st Century Cures is a bill that's getting a lot of attention. The Senate is going through the same process now that we did a year or two ago. So they're a little further behind. We expect that the Senate will take up the bill and mark it up, say, the end of the year. It still has a long way to go, but we do think it's going to become law. It has a $10 billion price tag or more. Which some people don't like to spend money. So there are a lot of things that we still have to overcome, but I think it will become law in this session of Congress. Basically what happened was that at some point, maybe a couple of months ago, the Democrats, and I don't want to make it totally partisan because it isn't, but the Democrats approached Fred Upton and we said, look, there's been a real cut in real terms in NIH funding over the last 5 years or so. Part of that's been because of sequestration. I don't know if people are familiar with that, but it's like an across-the-board cut that was instituted a few years ago. And NIH programs and grants have really been, a lot of them are not happening anymore. So we really need to include in this a fund for innovation, meaning additional money that would go to NIH just to deal with diseases where we haven't found cures. I mean, it wouldn't be strictly that, but that's the idea of the Innovation Fund. So we all agreed, Democrat and Republican, that we would have $2 billion over the next 5 years for a total of 10 in this Innovation Fund that would basically increase funding to NIH for research. The $10 billion for NIH for the Innovation Fund is actually mandatory funding. It is not an authorization. It's actually mandatory funding that doesn't have to go through the appropriations process. That's important because a lot of times bills authorize funding, but then the budget doesn't provide the funding. I think a lot of Americans know that the drug companies and a lot of corporations do a lot of research, obviously looking for new drugs or new medical devices. But the basic research, for the most part, is not done by pharmaceutical companies, medical device companies. It's done at universities primarily with money that comes from the National Institutes of Health. And that basic research is really fundamental, and that's what is neglected if the government doesn't get involved in a major way. Separate and apart from the $10 billion innovation fund for NIH, there's an additional $550 million that goes to FDA for similar type purposes. In other words, to try to do research and more innovation, specifically with drugs and medical devices. I mean, that's important because, again, the FDA has also had cuts. With sequestration, almost everything has been cut across the board the last few years. A big part of the 21st century cures is basically trying to, I use this term streamline, I don't know if that's the right word, the drug approval process. I know that always worries someone, or medical device probably, because they say, well, does that mean the process isn't working? No, the process is working. I mean, look, we say the FDA is the gold standard. I was at the European Union about a month ago, talking to the equivalent of the FDA in the European Union in Brussels. And, we're the gold standard. We're the most rigorous process there is for both drugs and medical devices. And I think that there have been some, there are ways that maybe you can streamline that without limiting effectiveness. Well, I think that the feeling was, and I guess this goes back to what we did in the last year or two. The whole idea was of 21st century cures, and the whole reason we were on the road so much in trying to get ideas was because we wanted to get ideas from individuals and outside groups, third-party groups. And so a big part of this is getting that input. I remember we had a hearing in these were not formal hearings, too, you should know. They were forums where it actually asked people to just come and talk informally. And one of them was in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Well, that's not very far, but you might not think that we would go to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And we did, and we had a very good forum, and we had a lot of people that spoke. It wasn't just the speakers that we brought from the area, but it was the audience was allowed to participate and ask questions or give input. So when you have a formal hearing in Washington of the Energy and Commerce Committee, the Health Subcommittee, the public just sits there. They don't ask questions or comment. So that's what we did, and that's what we continue to want. And again, a lot of it is because we think that these advocacy groups have, people who are actually patients and caretakers and who, in some ways, know, how to get through the red tape and what to do differently. Well, the president has a precision medicine initiative, but that is basically, the idea that is folded into this into the 21st century cures in the sense that we would follow the precision medicine initiative in terms of trying to get more funding and also in trying to have quicker approval of drugs and medical devices. So yes, they do dovetail. It's different, but they dovetail. In the process of getting the 21st century cures to the unanimous vote that we've already talked about, a lot of things did drop out. For example, there's very little that addresses specific diseases in the bill. And of course, the ALS advocacy groups, the different advocacy groups, wanted us to address their specific diseases, and we weren't able to do that because I think if we had, it would have taken a lot longer, and we would not have gotten a unanimous vote. So I think that sure, there are a lot of other things that could have been included, but I do think that we came up with a bill that can move and get approved, and ultimately will help even with those things that weren't included. So yes, there may not be something specifically for Alzheimer's, okay? But that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be research for Alzheimer's and a way of trying to address cures, through better drugs. So I think we've done a good job, and that although it may be more narrowly focused, it's actually not, because it's actually very broad. It can be used for a lot of areas that are broadly defined. Well, I think the 21st Century Cures probably won't get final approval until next year, because the Senate will probably take most of the rest of this year to get it through the Senate. And so therefore, if you assume the president signs it sometime next year, we could start to see funding and grants by the latter part of 2016.